Okay. All right. So, welcome to the gaggle, where we challenge and, if possible, demolish reigning media narratives. Uh, Today, we have a distinguished, nationally renowned litigator, Robert Barnes, with us. He's also an outstanding political analyst, and also with us is Peter Lavelle, host of the RT show Crosstalk, and he's also one of the founders of the Gaggle. So there's lots to talk about, and let's start right away. Now, Robert, you famously made a ton of money in 2016 when very early on you predicted that and bet money that Donald Trump will be elected president. What is your take now? I mean, do you still hold that his prospects for re-election are good? And in particular, what's your take on the first 2 days of the RNC convention? Because the as I see it, the problems that the Republicans have, which is to hold on to those industrial Midwestern states that they won in 2016 and which had voted solidly Democratic since the 1980s, that problem, how to hold on to those states, has not really been addressed. So what's your take?
Yeah, so two aspects of that. One is I think that right now I would give Trump at least a 2/3 chance of winning re-election. I think prior to the pandemic and the unprecedented policy response to the pandemic, I would have put him around 95% chance by historical metrics. In fact, everything was going to script. Joe Biden getting nominated was a sign of Donald Trump getting reelected by a whole range of historical metrics: presidential participation levels, voter registration levels, voter enthusiasm within disparate groups, economic numbers, things of that nature. Now, the policy response to the pandemic led to the economic. It basically deprived Trump of his trump card. He no longer had the economy as the ace in the hole. You can tell he's still sort of grieving over that loss by the way he talks about it. So that dropped it to around 66% to 75%. But I still favor him. I am trying to find a way to get over to London to place another substantial bet on him if he stays as an underdog. Because of the pandemic, it's tough getting over there. I may actually be a consultant on the Julian Assange case, so that may find me a way to weasel my way into London. I was willing to do the work for pro bono if I can just find a way to place a bet in the British betting markets. And I like Julian Assange as well, of course. So yeah, that's where I think. So I think fundamentally that he's still in the driver's seat. I told people that if they thought Trump was going to lose, don't bet on Trump, just bet against Biden, because the Democrats will replace him with someone who's actually a manageable candidate. They chose not to, and I think it's a major mistake on their part. In terms of the convention, I agree. I think from a technical perspective, it's better than the Democratic convention because the Democratic convention decided to sacrifice everything for communicating, look at how terrible the world is with the pandemic, including our own convention. Whereas the RNC, Trump has done some smart stuff. Appearing with the hostages was very smart. Appearing doing an immigration ceremony was very smart. His family still attests well for him. Because Biden can't put his son up, whereas Trump can, for the obvious reasons. That's the subtle message that Trump's running there. But I agree. The part of the convention that Trump has his fingers in, I think, is successful. The part that he doesn't, the traditional RNC convention, is a failure. Nikki Haley is a disaster. Yeah. Brought up issues you never bring up. Don't bring up white supremacists shooting black people in the church. That's not a Republican winner. Don't talk about bringing down flags. That's not a Republican winner. And I agree that what's missing from it, I mean, Don Jr. did a good job talking about it in part, but for the most part, they are missing. They should be focusing solely on persuadable voters, and persuadable voters voters are two groups. People who are thinking about voting but might not. They're low propensity voters. Overwhelmingly, that's working class voters on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side. It's just a little bit different coloration on the Democratic side in terms of its younger voters on the Democratic side. It's disproportionately African Americans and Latinos on the Democratic side, but also working class. On the Republican side, they needed to be talking to voters who are thinking about maybe not voting, who are leaning toward Trump,
Robert, what I think
I was just asking Peter, just same question to you. Do you think that the Republicans have done what they need to do? They need to appeal to these traditionally Democratic voters who don't like the Republican message. They like government. They like regulations. They don't have a problem with taxes. Have the Republicans made a successful pitch to those voters?
I think it's a really mixed bag, and while I think the Democratic convention was a complete wash, I mean, that was just unbelievably bad viewing, okay, and in every single metric. The first 2 days of the RNC is actually quite interesting. It's actually fascinating because you see different messages. And Robert's absolutely right. You have this very traditional GOP libertarian economic line, which I cringe every time I see it. Okay, I think it's fair to say, and we have to be honest, they're playing identity politics, but probably in a more useful, utilitarian way, and instead of just switch and bait like what the Democrats do all of the time. A lot of I'm more concerned with the economic messaging, and I think both parties are at fault. We still have some time with the GOP. I think the traditional GOP still, its influence is so overwhelming because basically they're running Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush when it comes to economics. Okay, which I'm totally against. What I find most frustrating in this election, and we saw my frustration was slightly pushed back on day two, is that Trump is a populist. Run like one. You haven't governed as one. Now come on and dust off that playbook because it worked. Okay. Another thing we saw, which I thought was really smart. And I really like the ordinary human touch, okay? Not just for propaganda purposes, because those are real people in real time, in real places. A politician has to go where your voter is. Donald Trump did that, okay? He's gone to them, that's good politicking, okay? Also what he's done, because pushing back against this totally irresponsible media, Russiagate, Ukrainegate, impeachment, all that, is that, Trump is saying to suburban voters, white suburban voters, I'm a human being, okay? I'm not what they tell you every single night, every breathing moment on Twitter, okay? That Trump is humanizing himself, and he's going to great lengths to do that. I give kudos to him. I'm not as optimistic as 2/3. I think it's going to be a very close election. I think what Robert had to say about voters is absolutely right, but I would give it a specific caveat: is the people that voted for Trump in the Midwest, working class families, he has to make sure they vote again. See, that's going to be the trick, is to get them to vote again. And so, but the negative, the Nikki Haley's, the Mike Pompeo's, I mean, just cringe.
Yeah. Because I was saying about that, you have two groups of persuadable. I was
so disappointed with that. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. You have two groups of persuadable voters. One are people that, as you mentioned, are people that may lean toward Trump but may not vote. They didn't vote in 2012. They have a long history of not voting. And the second are your swing voters, your Obama voters who swung to Trump. They're overwhelmingly working class. This whole election is going to be decided in 4 states: Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And these are voters, like I was telling some of my conservative friends, these are voters who, if you look historically, ancestrally, they actually have socialist leanings. If you go back to their grandparents and great-grandparents, the German socialists ran Milwaukee. There's a long history of the Farmer and Labor Alliance in Milwaukee being left. That is not, in Missouri, just this last year, they voted to expand Medicaid throughout the state. In a state
that think populism came from? It came
exactly.
From
that's the origin.
Yes.
The People's Party.
Robert, let me just ask you.
And it's places.
Yeah, let me just ask you. That whole thing that they had yesterday with the women and the minorities and to show how diverse and inclusive the Trump people are. Do you think that's effective?
Marginally. I agree with Peter that the part that's successful is the humanizing part. So, like, having Melania talk is always good, because really what Trump is doing, he did it in 2016. He's saying, "Can I be this evil guy if I have good kids and a wife that cares for me like this, the way she talks?" So that's always a plus, but it's a marginal plus. In other words, my fear is that everybody around Trump believes what the media was talking about in the first night, which was they sincerely believe in this mythical upscale suburban female voter that mostly does not exist as a meaningful voter. You know, there's only so many upscale women in the suburbs of Philadelphia. The way I told people is, you can have all the suburban Karens. The Democrats can have all the suburban Karens they want. Give me all the truck stop Terrys and where we're going to roll.
But Robert, don't you think? But it goes back to my point. I agree with you. This is a small demographic, but it's an important one, because I think that's what tipped it for Trump. So to answer George's question, all this diversity, it's for white suburbans. It's not for minorities. Okay.
Right.
All right. Let's then continue this. We're just coming up to the 15-minute mark, so let's continue. We'll have a part 2 of this discussion. There's too many issues to discuss. We can't just do it in one sitting. So, okay, we will resume in a moment with part 2.